Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's session. I'm Chelsea Jungett with SolarWinds MSP, and we're so glad to have you all here today. This session today focuses on the power of using data-driven automation. Our speaker is Dana Bullister with SolarWinds MSP, and she works on the strategic data initiatives here and helps IT pros use big data to improve their efficiency and effectiveness. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. We are recording this session. We'll share it after the event in case you miss parts or you want to share with a colleague. Also, Dana is going to be happy to take questions during the webinar, so we may stop throughout to answer any questions that might come up. So just use the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel and type those in, and we will keep our eye out for those. So with no further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Dana and get started.
Thank you very much. So as mentioned, I'll be giving a presentation on data-driven automation and its role in the IT services market shift. I am at SolarWinds MSP, and I'm part of the Strategic Data Initiatives team. And so we have a lot of experience in trying to create products that mold and empower MSPs to these impending changes, and I'm excited to give some further details on this. So I'll stick with some high-level themes about the shifting market, and as mentioned, feel free to jump in with any questions or comments at any time via the webinar chat, and I'll get started. So I'll cover 4 things. I'll first cover what exactly is data-driven automation, what do we mean by that, how and why is it impacting the world, how it's shifting IT services in particular, with a case study in LOGICcards, and what does this mean for you? So what is data-driven automation? The way I'm going to use it here for this webinar is I'm going to use it to mean automation that leverages some kind of advanced analytics. So I'm not talking about automation that exists in most products you might see, so things that are based on simple threshold triggers. I'm talking about automation that's really driven by some kind of statistics or analytical movement in the background. So the output of such automation can be some action, but it can also be some recommendation for you to take some specific action. So I've got 3 examples below. The first example, you can see, looks like some kind of social network there. You're welcome to comment to try and guess what it might be, but it's a social network. It's actually LinkedIn recommendations. So LinkedIn recommendations is one example of data-driven automation in implementation. So, clearly LinkedIn has various features, some of which are to recommend that a person connects with another person that might be 2 steps away from their network, right? And so these recommendations are powered by network analytics. LinkedIn also recommends things like jobs. It suggests jobs for you. It suggests, if you're a recruiter, it suggests candidates. So all of this stuff is driven by lots of analytics that go on in the background and make intelligent suggestions for what you should do. So the second example here is this lovely orange robot, which you may or may not be familiar with. And it's indeed an Amazon Kiva robot. So what exactly is this? I'm actually going to take a little break here to show you a brief video of what exactly this is. So you won't hear any sound, unfortunately, but I will kind of tell you, what's going on here. So you can see these Kiva robots. They basically move inventory for Amazon, and as you can see, everything is organized in this, kind of Manhattan, taxi cab geometry kind of way. And so each of these Kiva robots is actually it's actually programmed to be able to navigate this, and it's automated to a large extent. Each one has its own. Here we are. Yes. So they actually go on roads and highways, sort of like self-driving cars, actually. But they have they're programmed to be able to pick up inventory and move them in very specific ways in order to deliver things. So this is one impressive example of data-driven automation right here. That is great to touch on. So you can see, this is an example of data-driven automation that prompts actual actions, specifically with the Kiva robot. And so our third example here is an airline pilot dashboard. So this is one of my favorite examples because it shows, well, you may know that airline pilots, they certainly have to know and do a lot of things in order to navigate planes, but as these dashboards get more sophisticated, there's a lot more automation that comes into play. So for example, they might have automation having to do with having the plane take off in a certain way, or they might have landing type automation. But this is, overall, the pilot has to have this very distinct idea of what's going on at any given time so that they know which kind of automation to use and which one is specific. So the thing I like about these three examples is they are representative of one component of data-driven automation, which I think is fascinating, which is that data-driven automation is often the output of it is typically the merging of both people and technology. So people often think, oh, data-driven automation, it's all about robots doing everything and taking people's jobs and being completely autonomous. Well, to some extent, yes, but to a larger extent, no. It usually involves automation that helps people, like pilots, do their jobs much better and in various ways. So those are three examples. So data-driven automation, why are we worrying about this right now? What has come into play in terms of making this topic especially relevant? So I'm just going to go from the beginning. I'm sure you are all well aware, but Moore's Law comes into play here. It's an observation by Gordon E. Moore, co-founder of Intel, that the number of transistors on integrated circuits doubles about every 2 years. Strictly speaking, he originally said every year, but it was changed to 2 years a bit later after some additional observation here. So let's see. So this means exponential growth in efficiency in computer processing speed, memory capacity. So this is generally the reason that people point to for computers going from looking like this to looking more like this. And you can see the first image is NEX, which is the world's first digital computer in 1946. And the second computer is none other than the Google Pixel smartphone, which I hope to acquire myself very soon, unveiled in 2016. So you can see that over the passage of time, computers have become much more powerful and also much smaller. However, this is not the only result of Moore's Law. A large part of it is that our digital capacity to store and process information has also doubled about every 40 months. So you can see in this graph here that the overall data storage has grown significantly, clearly exponentially over time, and a greater proportion of data is now stored digitally as opposed to analog. So one stat from 2015 is that more data was created in the past 2 years than in the entire previous history of the human race, which is pretty impressive. Another chart I like to show is the world's largest photo libraries. So you can see this tiny dot here is the Library of Congress, and over that is Instagram, over that is Flickr, and over here is the ginormous beast known as Facebook. So this is something that I love to kind of show to illustrate the consequences of all of this. So what does this mean for the world, all of these changes? Well, it clearly means a lot of stuff. So here you can see that there's Watson. This is a robot developed by IBM that was put on Jeopardy and managed to beat some of the most skilled people at Jeopardy. And it's sort of the archetypal AI engine nowadays. So it's using AI, it's using data-driven automation, and it's able to outperform humans in many things that people once thought it was impossible for robots to do. So how does this translate to something more useful than Jeopardy? Well, in a lot of ways. So here you can see that I I've taken part of an article. It's titled "A New Partnership Between Humanity and Technology," and it actually goes on to describe one of the ways that IBM Watson is applied to real-world problems. So there's actually a division of IBM now called Watson Health, and what this does is it uses some of the same algorithms and AI that underlie Watson and apply it to healthcare, and it's fascinating to look into if you're at all interested in this sort of thing. They're basically compiling this data warehouse of lots of health-related data, medical records, and they use that and apply AI to it in various ways in order to better diagnose and treat disease. And it's really, really fascinating what they do. Relatedly, there are other companies. This one is not using Watson per se, but it's a company that does involve data-driven automation being applied to healthcare. It's called Health Map, and what it does is it consolidates a lot of data that people submit to the site about where various infectious diseases have been known to be at given times. And so it charts all of this data, and over time it's actually possible to use analytics, predictive analytics, to try and figure out where these infectious diseases will be before they ever get there. So now epidemiologists can use proactive analytics to fight disease even before it strikes in a particular region. So another fascinating way that data-driven automation is used. Clearly, it's not just healthcare, it's things like sales and marketing. So Target, people may be familiar with the story about how Target has a lot of analytics, and it can actually predict, much like Netflix, what a consumer might be interested in consuming even before they've ever attempted to do so. So you know, the story about Target is they actually targeted some magazine ads toward a young girl, and basically targeting her, you know, suggesting that she buy all of these products having to do with, you know, babies and pregnancy. So her father got very upset because they thought that Target was trying to you know, trying to suggest to his teenage daughter that she should get pregnant. But he apologized after some weeks when he found out that in fact his daughter was pregnant, and he had no idea, but Target did somehow via its algorithms for trying to predict this stuff. So that's one example of how data-driven automation can come to play in that field. Coursera, this is an amazing example of how data-driven automation can be applied to education. Coursera, it has a lot of often free online courses spanning all sorts of fields, but in addition to having these accessible ways of educating yourself, Coursera performs analytics on things like which parts of various classes or presentations people tend to pause at, and you know, how people perform on these quizzes of understanding and things like that. And they actually use this data to help optimize how people learn, which is really great. Amazon, people are familiar with Amazon, JP Morgan, you know, and lots of other finance companies. JP Morgan is just one example. They certainly use algorithms to help mitigate risk, and they do a lot of algorithmic trading to do so. Optimizely is one way that people use things like they conduct data-driven experiments to try and conduct online marketing much more effectively. And Ravel is actually an interesting company that applies data-driven automation to law. So it helps legal professionals draw insights and connections from a vast body of knowledge. They use advanced analytics to help make legal data free, transparent, and much more accessible to everyone. So anyway, these are just some ways that data-driven automation is influencing the world at large. You can tell that it has impact on lots and lots and lots of different industries. So what does this mean for the IT services industry? Well, I define IT services as an industry of some of the most diverse, real-time, fully digital data from an ever-increasing plurality of different technologies in a steady march toward the cloud. Well, this is one of the reasons why I was drawn to working at SolarWinds MSP as a data scientist initially. The IT services industry has some of the most amazingly diverse and real-time and digital data of any industry. And I believe that it's really on the cusp of having data-driven automation make a huge impact on its efficiency and its ability for IT providers to supply much better service. And I have some interesting graphics at the bottom. This is actually a reproduction of the graphics in the boardroom scene in Tron Legacy, made by a bunch of smart WebGL developers. So yeah, but I thought it was very cool. So I think that the IT services industry is ripe for benefiting from data-driven automation. So here are just a couple of different types of data that would be interesting from the perspective of trying to implement data-driven automation in IT services. So you can see IT people in IT services, they generally have their hands on things like performance data. They have their hands on system logs, things like user behavior, how various machines are connected to the network, how they're connected to each other, the history of which networks they have been connected to in the past, behavior in terms of which hardware has been linked up with various machines, even things like machine temperature. So all of these different types of data could potentially be consolidated in ways that provide insights that are helpful and valuable. So, according to a recent survey, we actually found that most IT service providers are well aware that data-driven automation of the future impact that data-driven automation is likely to have in their industry. So, according to the white paper, 73% of IT service provider respondents, they feel like they'll be able to deliver a range of new services as a result of data-driven automation, and more than half are actively fearful for those who do not adopt data-driven automation in the next few years, because they believe that these companies are going to lose out to more sophisticated competition. So clearly there's some awareness that analytics, automation, that they're going to have an impact in IT services. So many people have even described this shift that's likely to take place as comparable to the shift from IT services professionals shifting from break-fix to managed services. So people are well aware of the potential impact. So what does it actually mean? Well, ITSM software companies are spending a lot of investment in evolving analytics, automation, and integration capabilities in their products. So here's one story that describes it in Channel Pro. RMM solutions have really started taking a hard look at how they could convert some of the useful data that they have access to in ways that help give insight and intelligence to their consumers. Next, I'm going to give a deep dive into a product that I know very well. It's called LOGICcards, and I'm giving a deep dive here because it shows some of the ways that data-driven automation is actively being utilized to create insight and value for the IT services community right now. So I own the LOGICcards project, so I was able to see the evolution of which data was applied how, and it was a very exciting project. So what is LOGICcards? A machine learning driven solution. It's basically a notification engine. It sifts through RMM data of millions of different endpoints, workstations, and servers managed by SolarWinds MSP partners. And it converts these into real-time machine, user, asset, and business data into intelligent recommendations. So it kind of looks like this. So if this is the RMM dashboard, you can see all these devices. And LOGICcards is just a drop-down menu. It's a notification engine, and it provides you with all these different insights here that you can feel free to expand. Here are a couple examples of how LOGICcards uses analytics in order to highlight various insights. So one example is that it uses predictive analytics to notify MSPs of potential future issues. So in this case, it's notifying MSPs that there is likely to be one of their machines is likely to run out of disk space. So it hasn't happened yet, but instead of merely using something like a threshold where it, the dashboard notifies you of when disk space is at this particular point, right? It actually looks at the historical patterns and trends of that disk space, and it can predict what will happen in the future. Another one is predicting whether certain patches are likely to fail upon first installation. So this one actually looks across many, many different MSPs, and it looks at their patching behavior, and it looks to see whether particular types of patches have had a high failure rate in the past, and it proactively notifies MSPs who haven't yet started to patch that these are the ones that they should be looking out for. So other sorts of insights that LOGICcards provide, they mine global data on which viruses are detected, and they can generate these very personalized notifications regarding dangerous malware to be aware of. So this one is actually tailored to specific geographic regions. It can tell you whether a particular type of malware or virus has been detected in this particular place, which is pretty cool. And another type of insight is this is not predictive so much as it sheds some insight into how you as an MSP compare to other MSPs worldwide in terms of the types of assets you are managing. So it shows you these very real-time market trends, and real-time because it's really within a couple hours kind of insights. It can tell you what types of devices, how old they are in terms of what other MSPs in your space are maintaining, and then you can see it shows you also which operating systems, and you can see how you compare to this graph. So for example, if you have a bunch of old Windows XP devices, you might know that they're old, but this gives you a visualization of exactly how old and how relatively behind or ahead you are relative to everyone else. And you can also do the same thing for software versions. So for example, if you are very, very behind in a particular type of software version, like QuickBooks, you can see this relative to other MSPs. You can also see how much you might need to standardize on a particular version. So if you have 6 different versions of QuickBooks, you might want to standardize there. It also shows you different anomalous behaviors that might be relevant. So it might be an anomalous event, such as unusual login activity. You have someone logging in at a time that is very unusual relative to when people typically log in. So that uses various types of analytics to decide what constitutes something that's unusual, right? And this type of analytics, it's called anomaly detection. It can be implemented in many different contexts, not just when users log in. You can look at unusual performance behaviors or unusual CPU usage relative to other machines of that profile or relative to a machine's historical behavior and things like that. So there's really a lot of potential in anomaly detection type analytics for notifying MSPs of things that might be going wrong and recommending to them ways that they can address problems, or at least ways that they can look into what might be going on there. And another way you can look at it is it can seek out anomalous configurations of security features. So, for example, if you have an AV installed on the majority of devices on a given site, but you have it missing on one, it'll say this looks a little odd and notify you that perhaps you should look into that. It also integrates external data to draw links that might indicate potential security threats. So this is actually a newer card. It looks at public data on which domains have been registered to try and find domains that are very similar to legitimate domains under your management, such as a client or even your own company, and it notifies you that these have been registered, because one not too rare occurrence that can happen is that is that people, bad guys, they can register domains that are very similar, and then use this to email clients, email people, and try and steal identities, basically. So this integrates this information with your own registered domains to notify you of this sort of thing. So there are, let's see. All right, there are about 100 of these, well, more than 100 of these different types of cards, and they're constantly converting different types of data, or consolidating different types of data and converting them into insights that are of value. And another way it uses analytics, it actually looks at the way that you interact with cards. So the LOGICcards engine can tell whether a user, an IT admin, interacts with a card by opening it versus dismissing it without actually looking into the detail. So over time, it can actually get a sense of which types of cards that IT admin finds helpful and which it probably doesn't. So it can actually use what's called machine learning driven algorithms, machine learning algorithms, to learn over time what that MSP's preference profile is, to attempt to feed them cards that they're most interested in and filter out ones that they don't seem to be that interested in. It has cool features. You can assign via help desk or by email or via a shareable link. So in sum, this is just one example of how ITSM solutions are helping IT services professionals to leverage data-driven automation. So undoubtedly, it's really just the beginning here. So there are lots of advanced analytic tools that will be sure to go on the market, but this kind of encapsulates some of the ideas that I think will play a much greater role as the industry catches up. So there's still a lot of potential here for converting these rich data sets into business value. In terms of future directions for this feature, at least, we know that LOGICcards is going to use a lot more predictive analytics, a lot more anomaly detection in order to target other helpful security alerting, and as well as business insights, giving you tips and recommendations on ways that you can better secure your install base, ways that you can better capitalize on opportunities for cross-sell, things like that. So still a lot of potential in this feature as well as in many others. So in closing, features now, data-driven automation, it's in and actively affecting the IT industry. So it's important to definitely keep informed on the latest innovations in this area, and I predict there will be many, especially in analytics and in automation. So as a business, agility is just as important as wisdom and expertise in the market, and because everything, the technology, the market as a whole is shifting quite rapidly. It's definitely a good idea to be strategic about choosing partnerships, take into account future vision for leveraging these changes, make sure that's in focus, and most importantly, please do things that make the world a much more wonderful place. Be a happy person, because life is short. And on that note, I really thank you very much for joining me in this Happy Data Hour. This is one of the, probably from a completely unbiased opinion, the most exciting topic ever. So I'm really glad that you can join me today, and I'm happy to take any questions. I think we have some extra time. So I'll see.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Dina, for that great information. I love your Happy Data Hour graphic, given that you are currently speaking to us from Las Vegas, where you are having lots of fun with Happy Data.
Of course.
So yeah, if you have any additional questions, feel free to chat them in. As I said, we did record this, so we can send this out to you. Do watch your email. Another special offer we have going, which will be coming out to you by email very shortly, is a free trial offer to try out LOGICcards for yourself and see what kind of information you can gather about the networks that you manage using LOGICcards for a free 30-day trial as part of the SolarWinds MSP Remote Monitoring and Management product. So we'd love for you to give it a shot yourself and see how you can, if you like it. So let's see. Any questions?
I see that there are a couple questions slash comments here. One of them has to do with big data and the election and how it can sometimes be difficult to predict outcomes because it's very hard to factor in all variables to predict future events. So that I absolutely 100% agree, especially when you're in an environment that involves the human factor. Humans are extremely hard to predict. And honestly, I found the prediction of the election really, really fascinating because, I mean, it does go to show that it's hard to take in all of these different factors. There are ways that that big data and analytics can be applied that continue and are extremely accurate in predicting various things, but you know there are definitely ways that we can improve, and it is exceptionally important to remain critical and to not take things at face value, whether it comes from a person, whether it comes from a machine or a robot or anything. all of these different things can be wrong, and my hope in the future, especially in areas that are relevant for all people and all people's well-being, is that big data will be used for good, and that over time it will become more and more powerful as people recognize its potential limitations. But if you ask me whether I think it undermines the potential that analytics ultimately has to change the world, I would say no, not at all. But I think that it's healthy to have this bit of criticality here, as always. You could see the same thing. There was in Google Flu Trends, it was actually this fascinating effort where some very smart people at Google were using people's search history data to try and predict where the flu, well, first of all, they were using it to try and infer where the flu was most prevalent in various geographic regions. And so it turned out that for a while it was extraordinarily accurate, and the CDC, Centers of Disease Control, they were very interested in knowing this data, but historically had been, well, they'd had to basically do surveys via primary care physicians to try and figure out where the flu was, and it would take weeks and weeks to actually figure out where the flu had been. Right? It was nowhere near real time. What was really exciting about Google's method was that you could actually tell in near real time where the flu was and actually predict where it was likely to be in the future, and people were fascinated by this. Over time, its accuracy actually went down, unfortunately, but again, the human factor comes into play here, and people are really, really hard to predict. But I think that the potential that it showed, especially at the beginning, I think it gives hope to the possible implementations of this same type of analytics to predict not just the flu, but other diseases of trends that matter to people and to people's health. So, but yes, a grain of salt is always called for.
Yeah, it sounds like this, data-driven automation and using this big data is really still in its infancy. So it's one of those fields to watch because it's changing quickly, and the power and what we're able to get out of it is going to only grow as we become more sophisticated and more the human factor becomes a less part of it, a smaller part of it, I should say. Yep,
absolutely. Yeah, it's very hard to hard to apply algorithms in certain contexts, and very easy to apply algorithms in other contexts, and it's actually it's actually hard to figure out which contexts are going to be hard versus easy, right? You know, people thought that computer vision was going to be was going to be much easier than it actually turned out to be, and it's very, very difficult. But yeah.
All right. Well, I think we can go ahead and wrap up and give some folks back their mornings or afternoons. And thanks again for joining us. And as I said, we'll be sending out the recording and a link to try out LOGICcards yourself for free for 30 days very soon in your email. So keep your eyes peeled. Thanks again for your time, Dana, and have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.